At our daughter's funeral, my husband left for quiet luxury. My revenge exposed his affair and cash. My husband is on a luxury vacation while I'm at our daughter's funeral. He texted, "I'll call you later. Important meeting." But he doesn't know what I've already done. The day of my daughter Grace's funeral was painted in muted grays. The clouds hung low as if the sky itself mourned her loss. I stood at the edge of her grave, the weight of my sorrow pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. My little girl, my sweet Grace, was gone, and with her, a piece of my soul had been buried too. Friends and family murmured condolences, their voices barely penetrating the haze of my grief. But I noticed one thing above all, the empty space beside me. Marcus wasn't there. Hey, beautiful people, your support means everything to me. Help me reach my next big milestone by hitting that subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss an amazing video. Let's dive in. When the last shovelful of earth was laid, I couldn't feel anything but numbness. The service was over, but my nightmare wasn't. As I walked to the car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. For a moment, I thought it might be Marcus, finally reaching out to explain why he wasn't at his own daughter's funeral. Instead, it was a text message, important meeting. "I'll call you later." My hands shook as I stared at the screen. The audacity of those words made my blood boil. But it wasn't just the message, it was the small detail beneath it. The location tag. The text hadn't come from a conference room or an office building. It had come from a luxury beach resort. My vision blurred, not with tears this time, but with pure, unadulterated rage. Marcus wasn't in a meeting. He wasn't mourning. He was relaxing in paradise while I stood at our daughter's grave. I closed my eyes, clutching the phone tightly as memories flooded back. The weeks leading up to Grace's death, the arguments, the cold distance that had crept into our marriage. He had grown increasingly distant, his excuses piling up like bricks in a wall between us. Business trips, late-night meetings, vague mentions of stress. I had been too focused on Grace and her illness to question him. But now, everything fell into place. Marcus's absence wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Even in her final days, when Grace needed him most, he had found reasons not to be there. I remembered the nights I stayed by her bedside, holding her fragile hand as she fought for every breath. I had begged Marcus to come home from one of his supposed trips, to be with her, to be with us. He had promised, but he never showed up. I shook my head, trying to push those memories aside, but they clung to me like a shadow. My grief was still fresh, raw and bleeding, but something new was stirring within me. Beneath the pain was a spark of anger, growing hotter with every passing second. How dare he abandon us like this? How dare he lie to me, to our family, while our daughter's memory was barely cold? Sitting in the car, I stared at his message again. "I'll call you later." The casual tone, the lack of urgency, it was as if Grace's death was just another inconvenience in his carefully curated life. He didn't care. He didn't care about me, about Grace, or about the family we had built together. And that was when the spark of anger turned into something much darker. As the car rolled away from the cemetery, I clenched my fists and forced myself to focus. My tears had dried, and in their place was a cold determination. If Marcus thought he could walk away from this unscathed, he was wrong. If he thought he could betray us and still live his perfect little life, he was delusional. He had taken so much from me already, but I wasn't going to let him take anything else, not without consequences. The drive home felt endless, but it gave me time to think, to plan. I replayed every moment of the past year in my mind, searching for clues, for cracks in Marcus's facade, the late-night phone calls, the sudden expenses, the constant excuses. He had been building this web of lies for months, maybe even years, and I had been too distracted by Grace's illness to see it. But now, with the clarity that only rage can bring, I saw everything. When I arrived home, the emptiness of the house hit me like a punch to the chest. Grace's room was just as she had left it, her toys neatly arranged, her favorite blanket folded at the foot of her bed. I couldn't bring myself to go inside, so I closed the door and leaned against it, tears threatening to fall again. But I couldn't let them, not now. I needed to stay focused. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands still trembling as I sipped. I opened my laptop and began searching social media profiles, email accounts, bank statements, anything that could confirm what I already knew in my gut. It didn't take long to find the proof. Marcus had been withdrawing large sums of money from our joint account, all while claiming to be cutting back on expenses for Grace's medical bills. There were receipts for five-star hotels, expensive dinners, and spa treatments, all charged to a credit card I didn't even know he had. And then there were the photos. My heart clenched as I scrolled through his social media, finding carefully curated images of him with a younger woman. Lily, that was her name. She was tagged in nearly every photo, her face glowing with happiness as they lounged by the pool or shared cocktails on the beach. In one image, Marcus was kissing her on the cheek, a wide grin on his face. My stomach churned. I slammed the laptop shut, my breathing heavy. It was worse than I had imagined. He wasn't just unfaithful, he was living an entirely separate life, one where Grace and I didn't exist. My grief turned into a burning fury. Marcus had not only betrayed me, but had also betrayed Grace. He had chosen his own selfish desires over his family, over his daughter, over everything that should have mattered. I stared at my reflection in the window, my face pale and drawn, but my eyes sharp with determination. Marcus thought he had won, that he had escaped the responsibilities of our life together. He thought he could leave, me to grieve alone while he basked in the sun with his mistress. But he was wrong. He had underestimated me. As I stood there, a plan began to form in my mind. I didn't just want him to suffer, I wanted to dismantle his entire world, piece by piece. I would take everything he cared about, just as he had taken everything from me. And when I was finished, he would know exactly what it felt like to lose everything. That night, I sat down at the table with a notebook and pen, writing out every detail of my plan. Marcus's lies, his infidelity, his embezzlement. I would expose it all. He thought he was safe, untouchable, but he had no idea what was coming. I cried for my daughter, yes, but now I was going to make Marcus cry for everything he had taken from me. I stared at the notebook in front of me, the plan taking shape with every stroke of my pen. Marcus had built his life on lies, but those lies would be his undoing. Every betrayal, every selfish decision, every dollar stolen from our family, it was all fuel for the fire I was about to ignite. He thought he had escaped, unscathed, but his reckoning was coming. The first step was simple: gather evidence. I couldn't confront him without proof, not just for my own satisfaction, but to ensure there was no way he could wriggle out of the consequences. I opened my laptop again, this time with a clear focus. The financial records I had found earlier were just the tip of the iceberg. Marcus had been careful to hide his tracks, but not careful enough. I started with our joint account. Over the past year, there had been multiple withdrawals labeled as business expenses, each transaction sizable, often leaving me scrambling to cover Grace's medical bills. I had believed him when he said the money was tied up in investments or that it was being used for her treatments. Now I knew better. Cross-referencing the withdrawals with receipts I found in his emails, I realized most of the money had been spent on luxury hotels, fine dining, and high-end boutiques. It wasn't hard to guess who had been enjoying those luxuries with him, but the money wasn't the only thing he'd stolen. He had taken time, precious moments that Grace and I could never get back. As I scrolled through his emails, I found excuses he had sent to colleagues, canceling meetings to extend his trips. Meanwhile, I had been sitting by Grace's bedside, holding her hand and telling her everything would be okay. I clenched my fists, my anger boiling over again. Still, I needed more. Marcus was slippery, and I knew he would try to deny everything unless I had undeniable proof. That was when I decided to bring in someone who could help me dig deeper, a private investigator. I had never done anything like this before, but desperation and determination made me bold. I found a local investigator online, a woman named Eleanor who had glowing reviews for her discretion and thoroughness. When I called her, I kept my voice steady, though my heart pounded in my chest. "I need help uncovering my husband's secrets," I said, my words clipped and direct. Eleanor didn't ask unnecessary questions. She simply assured me she would find what I needed and set up a meeting the next morning. I met Eleanor in a quiet cafe. She was sharp-eyed and professional, with a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. As I laid out what I already knew, his affair, the financial discrepancies, his absence at Grace's funeral, her expression remained neutral, but I could tell she understood the gravity of the situation. "I'll dig into his financials, track his movements, and see if there's anything else he's hiding," Eleanor said, jotting notes in a small leather notebook. "It might take a few days, but I'll get you what you need." "Thank you," I said, my voice soft but resolute. "I want to make sure he pays for everything he's done." Over the next few days, Eleanor kept me updated on her progress. Each phone call brought a new revelation, each one more damning than the last. Marcus wasn't just spending our money on vacations and gifts for Lily, he had been embezzling from his own company. According to Eleanor's findings, he had been siphoning funds from his business accounts, covering his tracks with false invoices and fake vendors. It was a house of cards waiting to collapse, and I intended to be the one to push it over. But it wasn't just the financial betrayal that cut deep. Eleanor also uncovered emails between Marcus and Lily, discussing their plans to move abroad. Together, he had been setting the stage to leave me entirely, abandoning the life we had built and starting fresh with her. One email in particular made my blood run cold. In it, Marcus had written, "Once everything is finalized, we'll never have to look back. She'll never see it coming." He meant me. I sat in my kitchen that night, staring at the email printout in my hands. The audacity, the cruelty, it was almost too much to comprehend. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me, he had plotted to erase me from his life entirely, but if he thought I would sit back and let him win, he was sorely mistaken. With Eleanor's findings in hand, I began the next phase of my plan, building the trap. I needed to make Marcus believe he was in control, that his lies were still working. I couldn't confront him yet, not until the timing was perfect. So I sent him a carefully worded text. "I've been thinking about us. I know we've been distant, but I want to talk. Can we meet at the vacation home next weekend? I think we need some time to reconnect." I stared at the screen, waiting for his reply. It didn't take long. "Of course. I'll be there," he wrote, his tone casual as if nothing had happened. The irony wasn't lost on me. He thought he was manipulating me, stringing me along while he pursued his selfish desires. But the truth was, I was the one pulling the strings now. In the days leading up to our meeting, I worked tirelessly to ensure everything was in place. I gathered every piece of evidence Eleanor had uncovered, bank statements, emails, photos, and organized them into a folder. I also contacted an attorney, someone who could advise me on my legal options once I confronted Marcus. But I wasn't just thinking about legal consequences. I wanted Marcus to feel the weight of his actions, to understand the pain he had caused. That was why I prepared something extra, a video montage of Grace, her laughter, her smiles, the moments we had shared as a family before everything fell apart. I wanted him to see what he had thrown away. The night before our meeting, I sat alone in the living room, staring at a photo of Grace on the mantel. Her bright eyes and mischievous smile seemed to mock me, reminding me of everything I had lost. But as the tears threatened to spill again, I straightened my back and took a deep breath. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, for Grace, for me. Marcus had taken so much from us, but now it was my turn to take something from him. And when I was finished, he would know exactly what it felt like to lose everything. The drive to the vacation home felt surreal, like walking into the mouth of a storm I had meticulously crafted. The ocean stretched endlessly to my right, its rhythmic waves a stark contrast to the tempest brewing inside me. When I arrived, the house felt different, too quiet, too perfect, as though it was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. I parked the car, stepped out, and inhaled deeply. This place had once been a sanctuary for our family, a retreat filled with Grace's laughter and the warmth of togetherness. Now it felt like a stage for retribution, a battleground where the truth would finally destroy the facade Marcus had built. Inside, I moved with purpose. The folder of evidence Eleanor had compiled was heavy in my hands, not just in weight, but in meaning. I opened it on the dining table, spreading out the incriminating documents like pieces of a puzzle, bank statements, emails, and photos of Marcus with Lily. Each one was a dagger aimed at the heart of his lies. I had also brought something personal, something that would pierce deeper than any financial or legal evidence, the video montage of Grace. I connected my laptop to the television and queued it up, pausing on the first frame, Grace beaming at the camera, her eyes full of life. Marcus would see it, and he would feel the depth of what he had lost, not just his daughter, but his soul. When everything was in place, I sat down at the kitchen island and poured myself a glass of water. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the glass. The enormity of what I was about to do settled over me like a heavy cloak. This wasn't just about exposing Marcus, it was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and my voice. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway snapped me out of my thoughts. He was here. Marcus entered the house as if he owned the world, his smile practiced and confident. He carried a small overnight bag and wore a casual linen shirt, the epitome of a man on a carefree vacation. "Hey," he said, his voice warm, as though we were still the happy couple we used to be. I forced a smile, masking the storm inside me. "Hey," I replied, my tone steady. "Thanks for coming. I thought we needed some time to talk." He set his bag down and walked over to me, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I turned my face slightly, letting his kiss land awkwardly near my temple. It was subtle, but he noticed. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by his usual charm. "You're right," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "We've been through a lot. I'm glad you reached out." I nodded, folding my hands on the table to keep them from shaking. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I said, keeping my voice calm, about us, about Grace, about everything that's happened. Marcus nodded solemnly, as though he had any right to share in my grief. "I know it's been hard," he said, his tone dripping with practiced empathy. "But we'll get through this together, I promise." His words were a cruel joke, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached for the first piece of evidence, a bank statement showing a series of withdrawals he had labeled as business expenses. I slid it across the table toward him, my movements deliberate. Marcus glanced at the document, his brow furrowing. "What's this?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Just something I found while going through our accounts," I said, tilting my head as though I were genuinely curious. "I noticed some discrepancies. Maybe you can explain them to me." He picked up the statement, his eyes scanning the numbers. For a brief moment, his confident facade faltered. "These are just work expenses," he said, his voice tight. "You know how it is. Travel, meetings, client dinners. It adds up." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. Client dinners at five-star resorts? Meetings that cost thousands of dollars? "Marcus, do you really expect me to believe that?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I reached for another document, a receipt for a luxury suite at a beach resort, dated the same week Grace had been hospitalized. I placed it on the table, the weight of the truth crashed down between us. "Let me guess," I said, my voice icy. "Another client dinner?" Marcus's jaw tightened, his eyes darting toward the door as though he were already plotting his escape. "I don't know what you're trying to imply," he said, his tone defensive, "but you're clearly upset, and I think we should talk about this later." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the silence of the house. "Later? Like when you're on your next business trip?" "No, Marcus, we're talking about this now." I stood, pushing my chair back with enough force to make it screech against the floor. Walking to the living room, I grabbed the remote and turned on the television. The screen lit up with Grace's smiling face, frozen in the first frame of the video I had prepared. Marcus froze, his eyes fixed on the screen. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I pressed play. The video began to roll, showing clips of Grace laughing, playing, and blowing out candles on her birthday cake. Her voice filled the room, bright and full of joy, a stark contrast to the heavy tension between us. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I turned to Marcus, my voice trembling with rage. "This is what you missed while you were off with her. This is what you threw away for your selfish desires." He didn't respond. He couldn't. The weight of the video, of Grace's absence, was too much for even him to deflect. But I wasn't finished. I picked up the final piece of evidence, a printed email from Lily detailing their plans to move abroad together. I slammed it onto the table in front of him. "Were you even going to say goodbye?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "Or were you just going to disappear, leaving me to pick up the pieces while you played house with her?" Marcus's face turned pale, his confidence evaporating like smoke. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "You took everything from me, Marcus, my daughter, my trust, my life, and now you're going to pay for it." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Grace's laughter still playing on the screen. Marcus looked at me, his expression a mixture of guilt, anger, and panic. He had no idea what was coming next. The air between us felt heavy, a suffocating mixture of tension and unspoken truths. Marcus sat frozen, his face pale as the weight of the evidence I'd laid before him sank in. The laughter of our daughter still echoed softly from the television, a cruel reminder of everything he had turned his back on. I crossed my arms, my gaze unwavering as I stared him down. "Say something," I demanded, my voice low and sharp. You always have something to say, Marcus. So explain this to me. Explain how you justified abandoning your daughter while she was dying. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I didn't abandon her, he said finally, his voice trembling. I was working. I was trying to provide for us. Provide for us? I shot back, my tone laced with venom. Is that what you call draining our accounts to fund your vacations and your mistress? Is that what you call leaving me alone to watch Grace die while you were too busy lounging on a beach? His hands clenched into fists on the table, but he didn't meet my eyes. I didn't know it would get this bad, he muttered. I didn't know she would die. You didn't know because you weren't there, Marcus. I finished for him, my voice breaking on the word. You didn't care enough to know. The words hung in the air like a knife between us. For a moment, he looked like he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped and he let out a long, shaky breath. I made mistakes, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't there when I should have been. But you don't understand. I needed an escape. I couldn't handle watching her suffer. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You needed an escape? Do you think I didn't? Do you think I didn't cry myself to sleep every night, praying for a miracle while you were off living your fantasy life? You didn't need an escape, Marcus. You needed an excuse. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I stepped closer, grabbing the folder of evidence and pulling out a photo of him and Lily smiling arm in arm on a yacht. I held it up in front of him, my hands trembling with anger. Was she worth it? I demanded. Was she worth losing your daughter, your family, your soul? He flinched as though I had struck him, his eyes flicking to the photo and then away. It wasn't like that, he said, his voice desperate. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I needed someone who wasn't drowning in grief all the time. The words hit me like a slap to the face. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. Grief? I repeated, my voice shaking. You think I wanted to be drowning in grief? You think I chose this? You're the one who left, Marcus. You're the one who abandoned us. He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off, slamming the folder onto the table. Save it, I snapped. I don't care about your excuses, because while you were busy playing house with her, I was busy making sure you'll never get away with it. His eyes widened, the first glimmer of real fear flashing across his face. What do you mean? He asked, his voice unsteady. I smiled coldly, reaching into my bag and pulling out a stack of documents. These, I said, dropping them onto the table in front of him, are copies of every fraudulent transaction you made, every dollar you embezzled from your company, every cent you stole from us. His hands trembled as he picked up the documents, his eyes scanning the pages. How did you get this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Does it matter? I replied, my tone icy. What matters is that the authorities have them too. I reported you, Marcus. They're probably already building a case. His face went pale, his breathing quickening. You can't do that, he stammered. Do you know what will happen to me? I'll lose everything. You mean like I lost everything? I shot back, my voice rising. Like Grace lost everything because you were too selfish to be there for her? Yes, Marcus, I know exactly what will happen. And I don't care. He stood abruptly, pacing the room as he ran his hands through his hair. You don't understand, he said, his voice frantic. If this gets out, I'll go to prison. My reputation will be ruined. Good, I said simply, crossing my arms. You deserve it. He turned to face me, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. You're just doing this to hurt me, he accused. You're not thinking about the consequences. I stepped closer, my eyes blazing with fury. The consequences? I repeated. You think I'm not thinking about the consequences, Marcus? I have thought about nothing else, every sleepless night, every tear I've shed, every moment I've spent planning this. I've thought about the consequences, and I'm ready to face them. Are you? He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find a response. For the first time, he looked truly defeated, the weight of his actions crashing down on him like a tidal wave. But I wasn't finished. I turned back to the television, pausing the video of Grace on her birthday. Look at her, I said, my voice trembling. Look at what you missed. Look at what you threw away. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto the screen. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I thought I saw tears welling in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. I shook my head, my heart heavy with anger and grief. It's too late for sorry, Marcus. Sorry doesn't bring Grace back. Sorry doesn't undo the damage you've done." The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the television. Marcus sank into a chair, his head in his hands, while I stood over him, my arms crossed. "You thought you could betray me, betray us, and walk away unscathed," I said, my voice steady. "But now you know the truth. You can't, and you won't." As the weight of my words settled over him, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I had reclaimed a piece of myself, a piece of my strength. Marcus had taken so much from me, but he couldn't take this. He couldn't take my power, my voice, my determination. I turned off the television, the room plunged into silence. "We're done here," I said, my voice firm. "You can leave. But don't think for a second that this is over." Marcus looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt, fear, and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. But I didn't care. This wasn't about him anymore, this was about me, and I was just getting started. Marcus didn't leave immediately. He sat slumped in the chair, staring at the folder of evidence as though willing it to disappear. His once confident demeanor had dissolved into a pitiful display of defeat and denial. I stood by the window, my arms crossed, watching the waves crash against the shore in the distance. For so long, Marcus had controlled the narrative of our lives. Now that control was mine. "You should go," I said, breaking the heavy silence. My voice was cold, unyielding. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow. "Please, let me talk about this," he pleaded. "We can fix this. Fix us." I turned to face him, my expression unflinching. "There's no us, Marcus. There hasn't been for a long time, and now there's no fixing this either." He stood, gripping the edge of the table as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Ruin me? Destroy my life?" I tilted my head, a humorless smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "I'm not ruining your life, Marcus. You did that all on your own. I'm just making sure everyone else sees it." He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Don't," I said. "Just leave." With that, I turned away, my resolve unwavering. I didn't watch as he gathered his things and left. The sound of the door closing behind him was enough. I stood in the quiet aftermath, letting the tension seep out of my body. The first battle was over, but the war was just beginning. The next morning, I got to work. Marcus had underestimated me for years, treating me like a passive participant in our marriage, someone too blinded by love or duty to challenge him. But he had no idea what I was capable of when pushed to my limits. The first step was ensuring his professional downfall. I drafted an anonymous email to the board of directors at his company, attaching copies of the financial documents Eleanor had uncovered. The email was concise and damning, detailing his embezzlement and fraudulent activities. I didn't just send it to the board, I sent it to key stakeholders, investors, and even the company's legal team. There would be no way for Marcus to wiggle out of this one. As I hit send, a sense of satisfaction washed over me. Marcus had built his career on lies, and now those lies would unravel in spectacular fashion. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. By the end of the day, news of Marcus's financial misconduct had spread like wildfire within his company. Eleanor, ever thorough, kept me updated on the chaos unfolding behind closed doors. "They're conducting an internal investigation," she told me over the phone. "It's only a matter of time before they bring in law enforcement." "Good," I replied, my tone steady. "Let them." Meanwhile, I made sure Marcus's personal life wasn't spared from scrutiny. I shared the photos of him and Lily with a carefully curated list of mutual acquaintances, friends, family, colleagues. The reactions were immediate and visceral. Messages flooded my phone, most of them expressing shock and outrage. People who had once admired Marcus now saw him for what he truly was, a selfish, deceitful man who had betrayed not only his wife, but also his daughter's memory. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about ensuring he could never hurt anyone the way he had hurt me. 2 days later, I received the call I had been waiting for. A stern voice on the other end of the line introduced himself as Detective Reynolds, part of the task force investigating financial crimes in our city. He explained that they had received credible evidence of Marcus's embezzlement and were moving forward with an official investigation. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention," he said. "We'll be in touch if we need further information." I hung up, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with a sense of vindication. For months I had felt powerless, trapped in a web of grief and betrayal. Now I was the one holding the threads, and Marcus was the one caught in the trap. The day Marcus was arrested was both surreal and strangely satisfying. I watched from the window as two plainclothes officers approached him outside his office. He tried to maintain his composure, but the sight of him being handcuffed and led into a squad car was a moment I would never forget. My phone buzzed incessantly after the news broke. Friends and acquaintances shared articles and social media posts, their messages a mix of disbelief and morbid fascination. Marcus's name was plastered across headlines. Prominent executive arrested for embezzlement. Businessman's double life exposed in shocking scandal. I didn't respond to any of the messages. Instead, I sat in my living room sipping tea and scrolling through the coverage. The photos accompanying the articles were unflattering, Marcus being led away in handcuffs, his face pale and drawn. It was poetic justice. A week later, Marcus called me from jail. I stared at the phone as it rang, his name flashing on the screen. For a moment, I considered answering, just to hear the desperation in his voice. But then I remembered Grace's laughter, the nights I had spent alone in the hospital, the cold emptiness of her funeral. I let the call go to voicemail. He called again the next day, and the day after that. Each time, I ignored him. I didn't need to hear his excuses or his pleas. I had given him enough chances, enough forgiveness. Now it was his turn to face the consequences. The media storm continued to rage, and I watched it all unfold from the safety of my home. Reporters camped outside Marcus's former office, eager for statements from his colleagues. Tabloids speculated about his relationship with Lily, painting her as a gold-digging accomplice. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control over my life. Marcus had tried to take everything from me, but he had underestimated my strength, my resilience. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. As the weeks passed, I began to rebuild. I sold the vacation home, the place that had once been a symbol of our family, but had become tainted by Marcus's betrayal. I donated the proceeds to a charity supporting children with terminal illnesses, a tribute to Grace's memory. Every decision I made, every step I took, was a reminder that I was more than the pain Marcus had caused me. I was a mother, a survivor, a woman who had reclaimed her power. And Marcus? He was just a man who had lost everything. The silence in my house was different now. It wasn't the suffocating stillness that had haunted me after Grace's death, or the heavy quiet that Marcus's betrayal had left behind. This silence was lighter, almost peaceful, as though the house itself was finally able to breathe again. Marcus was gone, his life in ruins, and I had made sure he could no longer manipulate or hurt anyone. The headlines about his trial had begun to fade, replaced by fresher scandals and fleeting news cycles. But for me, the echoes of his downfall remained, lingering like the scent of rain after a storm. I sat on the couch, staring at the flickering flames in the fireplace. The warmth should have been comforting, but a strange hollowness lingered in my chest. I had done what I needed to do, what I knew was right. Marcus deserved every consequence, every ounce of the public humiliation and legal retribution he faced, and yet I couldn't ignore the faint ache that whispered in the back of my mind. It wasn't regret. No, I didn't regret exposing him, dismantling the empire of lies he built on the foundation of our broken family. It was something else, a quiet realization that revenge, as necessary as it had been, couldn't mend everything. It couldn't bring Grace back or erase the scars Marcus had left on my heart. Justice had been served, but justice wasn't the same as healing. I let out a deep breath, running my fingers along the edge of the coffee table. A framed photo of Grace sat there, her smile radiant as ever. I picked it up, tracing the curve of her cheek with my thumb. "I hope I made you proud," I whispered, my voice barely audible. In that moment, I made a decision. It was time to move forward, not just for me, but for Grace. She had been my light, my reason for fighting through every storm. I couldn't let her memory be tied to the pain Marcus had caused. I needed to create something beautiful from the ashes of our past. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. I started by packing up the family home, boxing up memories that carried both joy and sorrow. It wasn't an easy process. Every room held fragments of a life that no longer existed. The laughter that had once filled the living room, the faint scent of Grace's favorite lavender shampoo in the bathroom, the small handprints she had left on the windows. But as painful as it also felt liberating. In each box I sealed was a step closer to reclaiming my life, to shedding the weight of a house that had become more of a prison than a sanctuary. I reached out to a realtor, listing the house for sale. When the for sale sign went up on the front lawn, I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness for what I was leaving behind, but also hope for what lay ahead. Moving to a smaller, quieter apartment brought its own challenges, but it also offered a fresh start. The space was modest but warm, with sunlight streaming through the windows and a cozy nook by the bay window where I could sit with a cup of tea and read. It felt like mine, free from Marcus's shadow, free from the ghosts of our past. I started reconnecting with friends I hadn't spoken to in months, even years. Grief and betrayal had isolated me, but now I found solace in their company. We shared dinners, laughter, and stories that reminded me of the world beyond my pain. Slowly, I began to rediscover the pieces of myself that had been buried under the weight of loss. I also threw myself into new pursuits, things I had always wanted to do but never had the chance. I enrolled in a photography class, learning how to capture the beauty of fleeting moments. I volunteered at a local children's hospital, reading stories to kids and seeing their faces light up with wonder. These small victories felt like the first steps toward healing, like planting seeds in a garden that had long been barren. One afternoon, as I sat by the bay window with Grace's photo in my hands, an idea began to take shape. I wanted to honor her memory in a way that would bring light to others, just as she had brought light to my life. That's when the Grace Foundation was born. I started small, reaching out to community leaders and organizations for support. The foundation's mission was simple: to provide resources and support for families with children facing terminal illnesses. It was a cause close to my heart, one that allowed me to channel my grief into something meaningful. The first event we organized was a charity walk, and I was overwhelmed by the response. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers came together, their footsteps echoing a shared purpose. As I stood at the starting line, looking out at the sea of faces, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Grace's memory was alive in every step they took, in every dollar raised to help families in need. The foundation gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It reminded me that love could endure, even in the face of unimaginable loss. Grace's spirit lived on, not just in my heart, but in the lives of the families we helped. Despite the progress I had made, there were still moments when the past crept up on me uninvited. Late at night, when the world was quiet and the shadows grew long, I would find myself thinking of Marcus, not with longing or regret, but with a lingering sense of curiosity. Did he feel remorse for what he had done? Did he ever think of Grace, of the life he had so carelessly thrown away? I would never know, and perhaps that was for the best. Marcus's chapter in my life was closed, sealed shut by the choices he had made. My story was mine to write now, and I wasn't going to let his mistakes define it. One evening, as I sat on the couch flipping through an old photo album, I came across a picture of Grace and me at the beach. She was building a sandcastle, her face scrunched up in concentration, while I knelt beside her, laughing. I smiled, a bittersweet ache blooming in my chest. The memories no longer felt like daggers, they felt like gifts, reminders of the love we had shared. "I miss you every day," I whispered, my voice soft. "But I'm going to be okay, I promise." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and slowly, life began to take on a new rhythm. The pain didn't disappear, it never truly would, but it became a part of me, a quiet reminder of where I had been and how far I had come. The Grace Foundation continued to grow, touching more lives than I ever could have imagined. Every success, every family we helped, felt like a small victory for Grace's legacy. As I stood on the stage at our second annual fundraiser, looking out at the crowd of supporters, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Marcus's name was a distant memory, his presence erased from the life I had rebuilt. This was my story now, a story of resilience, of love, of finding light in the darkest of places. And as I spoke into the microphone, my voice steady and strong, I knew that Grace was with me, her light guiding me forward. The envelope sat on my kitchen table, an unassuming piece of paper that carried the weight of everything I thought I had left behind. My name was scrawled across the front in Marcus's familiar handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. It had arrived earlier that day, forwarded from the old address. For hours, I had ignored it, leaving it unopened while I went about my day. But now, as the house settled into its nightly stillness, I found myself staring at it, unable to look away. I didn't want to read it. Whatever Marcus had to say, it wouldn't undo the pain he'd caused or the choices he'd made. But something about the letter felt different, heavier. It wasn't just an attempt to justify himself. I could feel that even before breaking the seal. Finally, with trembling fingers, I picked it up and tore it open. The paper inside was creased, the words written in a hurried, uneven hand. I took a deep breath and began to read. Dear narrator's name, I don't know if you'll read this. Part of me hopes you don't, because I don't deserve to have my words heard by you. But if you are reading this, I need you to know I'm sorry for everything. I've spent every day in here thinking about Grace, about you, about what I did to both of you. There are no excuses for my actions, no words that can erase the pain I caused. I know that now. But there's something I've been carrying for so long, something I need to tell you, even if it doesn't change anything. The night Grace died, I was on a plane. You probably remember one of my so-called business trips, but what you don't know is that I wasn't just running away from my responsibilities. I was running from the truth. Before I left, I'd had a conversation with her doctor. He told me Grace's condition was worsening, that her chances of survival were slim. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle the thought of losing her, of watching her suffer, of failing her as a father. So I ran. I boarded that plane and left you to face it all alone. But there's something else. I found out weeks later, after it was too late, that there had been an experimental treatment available. It wasn't a guarantee, but it could have been a chance. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to have false hope. But now I realize the truth. I didn't tell you because I was afraid. Afraid of hope. Afraid of losing her even after trying everything. I failed Grace. I failed you. And I will live with that for the rest of my life. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a response. But I needed to tell you this. I needed you to know the truth. Yours, Marcus. The letter slipped from my hands and fluttered to the table. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, my heart pounding in my ears. The words on the page blurred as tears filled my eyes, spilling over before I could stop them. An experimental treatment, a chance, however slim, that Grace could have survived, and Marcus had kept it from me. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My grief for Grace, which I thought I had learned to live with, surged back with a vengeance. All this time I had believed I'd done everything I could for her, that I had fought with everything I had. But now I wasn't so sure. For hours, I sat in silence, the letter a constant presence on the table in front of me. My emotions were a tangled mess, rage, sorrow, guilt, even pity. Marcus's words had reopened wounds I thought had healed, forcing me to confront questions I didn't want to ask. Had I failed Grace? Could I have done more if I'd known about the treatment? And what about Marcus? Did his confession change anything about the man he had become? I wanted to hate him. I wanted to throw the letter into the fire and let it burn along with every memory of him. But as much as I wanted to, I couldn't. His words, his guilt, they were real. For the first time, I saw Marcus not as the villain I had painted him to be, but as a deeply flawed, broken man who had made terrible choices out of fear and weakness. That realization didn't excuse him. It didn't erase the pain he had caused or the lives he had destroyed, but it made him human, and that made my feelings all the more complicated. The next morning, I went for a walk, hoping the crisp air and the sound of birdsong would help clear my mind. The letter was still fresh in my thoughts, its words echoing with every step I took. By the time I returned home, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to write back. There was nothing I could say that would bring Grace back or change the past, but I wasn't going to ignore the letter either. I needed to confront it, to face the truth it held, even if it meant reopening old wounds. That evening, I sat down with my journal, the one I had started after Grace's death but had abandoned in the chaos of Marcus's downfall. I wrote down everything I was feeling, every thought and memory the letter had stirred. I wrote about Grace, about her laughter and her strength, about the love that had filled our lives even in the darkest moments. And I wrote about Marcus, about his betrayal, his weakness, and the pain he had caused. But I also wrote about his confession, about the weight of his guilt and the humanity it revealed. By the time I finished, the pages were filled with raw, unfiltered emotions. I closed the journal and sat back, feeling a strange sense of release. For the first time, I wasn't holding it all inside. I was letting it out, letting it go. In the weeks that followed, I continued to reflect on the letter and what it meant for my journey forward. I didn't forgive Marcus, not entirely, But I also didn't let his actions define me. The choices he had made were his burden to bear, not mine. Instead, I focused on Grace, on the light she had brought into my life and the love that would never fade. I channeled my energy into the Grace Foundation, ensuring that other families would have the resources and support they needed to fight for their children. And slowly, I began to heal, not just from Marcus's betrayal, but from the lingering guilt and grief that had weighed me down for so long. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer controlled me. One evening, as I sat by the bay window with a cup of tea, I looked out at the setting sun and felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Grace's photo sat on the table beside me, her smile a constant reminder of the love that had carried me through the storm. "I hope you're proud of me," I whispered, my voice soft. And for the first time, I believed she was. The decision to visit Marcus wasn't easy. For weeks after reading the letter, I wrestled with whether seeing him face to face was even necessary. Part of me felt I had already moved on, that confronting him might dredge up pain I had worked so hard to bury. But another part of me, the part that had carried Grace's laughter and Marcus's betrayal in equal measure, needed to hear his explanation, not for him, but for me. Closure wasn't something that would come neatly tied with a bow. I knew that. But this visit felt like the final thread I needed to cut before I could truly leave the past behind. The drive to the prison was long and quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound to accompany my thoughts. The landscape blurred by in shades of gray, the winter sky heavy with clouds. By the time I reached the facility, my nerves felt like a tightly coiled spring. I parked the car and sat for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I gathered my composure. Inside, the air was sterile and cold. The sharp clang of metal doors and the echo of footsteps down the tiled hallways were unnerving. A stark reminder of where Marcus had ended up. The guard led me to a small visitation room with a table and 2 chairs separated by a thick pane of glass. A phone hung on either side of the barrier, the only means of communication. I sat down and waited. Minutes later, Marcus was led in, flanked by 2 guards. His appearance startled me. The man I had once known as confident, polished, and self-assured now looked frail and hollow. His face was gaunt, his hair streaked with gray, and his eyes carried a weariness I had never seen before. He shuffled to his seat, his cuffs clinking softly as he sat down. For a moment, we simply stared at each other through the glass. I picked up the phone first, the cold plastic pressing against my ear. Marcus hesitated, then lifted his own receiver. "You look good," he said awkwardly, his voice raspier than I remembered. I didn't return the sentiment. "Why did you write to me?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. He blinked, caught off guard by my directness. I needed to," he stammered. "I've been carrying that secret for so long, and I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. You deserve to know the truth." "The truth?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "You mean the truth about how you ran away from Grace when she needed you most? Or the truth about how you kept the possibility of treatment from me because you were too afraid?" Marcus winced, the words hit him like physical blows. "I know I failed her," he said, his voice cracking. "I failed both of you. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret it." "Regret doesn't change anything," I shot back, my anger simmering just below the surface. "It doesn't bring her back. It doesn't undo the choices you made. So why now? Why confess after all this time?" His hands tightened around the receiver, his knuckles white. "Because I can't carry it anymore," he admitted. "Every night I see her in my dreams, her smile, her laugh, and then the look on your face when you realized I wasn't there. It haunts me. It's my punishment, and I deserve it." I studied him through the glass, searching for any sign of manipulation, any trace of the man who had once lied so easily. But all I saw was a broken shell, someone crushed under the weight of his own guilt. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad either. I just felt nothing. "I came here because I needed to hear it from you," I said finally. "I needed to know if you truly understood the damage you caused. And now I do." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of hope and despair. "Does that mean you forgive me?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. I thought about Grace, about the love she had brought into our lives, and about the pain Marcus had inflicted. Forgiveness was such a simple word, but it carried so much weight. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said honestly. "But I can let go. I can move forward, and that's enough for me." His shoulders slumped, as though the words had both relieved and defeated him. "I understand," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry for everything." I nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. "Goodbye, Marcus." I stood, placing the receiver back on its cradle. Marcus watched me through the glass, his expression unreadable, as I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. The drive home felt lighter, as though a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. The gray skies seemed brighter, the road ahead clearer. Marcus's confession hadn't changed the past, but it had given me the clarity I needed to move beyond it. That evening, I sat by the bay window with a journal in my lap, writing down everything I had experienced at the prison. The anger, the sadness, the strange sense of closure. It all spilled onto the page, raw and unfiltered. When I finished, I closed the journal and placed it on the table beside Grace's photo. "I did it," I whispered, looking at her smiling face. I finally let him go. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heater. But in that silence, I felt Grace's presence, her warmth filling the space around me. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The memories of Marcus's betrayal and Grace's loss were still there, but they no longer consumed me. They were a part of my story, yes, but they didn't define it. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the sunlight dance across the floor. The world felt new, full of possibilities I hadn't dared to dream of before. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I was ready to face it, one step at a time. The days following my visit to Marcus felt like stepping into a new world, one where the ghosts of the past no longer had the power to hold me back. For years, my life had been defined by grief, betrayal, and the weight of unanswered questions. But now, for the first time, I felt truly unburdened. The confrontation had been my final act of closure, and as I walked away from that prison, I knew I had left more than just Marcus behind. I had left behind the guilt, the anger, and the what-ifs that had haunted me for so long. Back at home, I decided it was time to create a physical representation of my emotional shift. I spent a weekend organizing every corner of my apartment, sorting through boxes that had remained unopened since my move. It was a therapeutic process, one that allowed me to confront the pieces of my past I had been avoiding. I started with Grace's belongings, her toys, her clothes, her books. Each item was a bittersweet reminder of the joy she had brought into my life. I took my time, holding each piece and letting the memories wash over me. There was no rush, no need to push through the emotions. When I was ready, I carefully packed some of her things to donate, knowing they could bring comfort to another child. Other items, like her favorite bunny and the drawings she had made for me, I kept, placing them in a memory box I could revisit whenever I needed to feel close to her. As I worked, I felt a sense of lightness begin to settle over me. My apartment no longer felt like a temporary refuge, but a true home, a space where I could nurture new beginnings while honoring the past. With my physical space in order, I turned my attention to the future. The Grace Foundation had grown steadily over the past year, and I knew it was time to take the next step. Inspired by the letters and emails I had received from families we had helped, I began planning a new initiative, a mentorship program for parents navigating the challenges of caring for children with terminal illnesses. The idea filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. I reached out to volunteers, healthcare professionals, and community leaders, building a network of support that would allow the program to thrive. The work was challenging but deeply rewarding. Each small success was a reminder of why I had started the foundation in the first place. Grace's memory wasn't just alive, it was making a difference in the lives of so many. Outside of my work with the foundation, I began exploring other passions I had put on hold for too long. Photography, which had once been a hobby, became a source of creative fulfillment. I started taking my camera on long walks, capturing the beauty of everyday moments, the golden light of sunset filtering through trees, the laughter of children playing in the park, the intricate details of a flower in bloom. Each photo felt like a celebration of life, a way of seeing the world through Grace's eyes. One of my favorite projects was creating a photo journal dedicated to her memory. I filled it with images that reminded me of her: soft pastel skies, butterflies dancing among wildflowers, and the sparkle of sunlight on water. It was a quiet, personal tribute, one that brought me comfort and joy. As I opened myself to new experiences, I found that people began to re-enter my life in unexpected ways. Old friends who had drifted away during my darkest days reached out. Their presence was a reminder of the connections I had once cherished. New friendships blossomed as well, born from shared interests and a mutual desire to build something meaningful. One evening, I attended a community art event hosted by a local gallery. It was a small gathering, intimate and welcoming, with people mingling over wine and discussing the pieces on display. I brought a few of my own photographs to share, unsure of how they would be received. To my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Strangers approached me with kind words and genuine interest. Their encouragement sparked a confidence I hadn't felt in years. Among the attendees was a woman named Clara, an artist who specialized in mixed media. We struck up a conversation that quickly turned into a friendship, bonded by our shared love of creativity and a mutual understanding of loss. Clara had lost her partner to cancer several years earlier, and her art reflected her journey of healing. Through her, I found not only inspiration but also a kindred spirit, someone who understood the complexities of grief and the resilience it took to rebuild. As the months passed, I began to rediscover the simple joys of life. I allowed myself to laugh again, to savor moments of happiness without the guilt that had once overshadowed them. Whether it was sharing a meal with friends, dancing in the kitchen to Grace's favorite songs, or watching a sunrise with a cup of tea in hand, I embraced each moment as a gift. One particularly beautiful day, I took a drive to the beach, a place that had always held a special significance for Grace and me. Standing at the edge of the water, the waves lapping gently at my feet, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The sky stretched endlessly above me, the horizon a reminder of the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. I closed my eyes and imagined Grace beside me, her laughter mingling with the sound of the surf. "Thank you," I whispered, the words carried away by the breeze, "for everything." In time, I began to imagine a future filled with possibility. The wounds of the past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined who I was. I was stronger now, more resilient, and deeply grateful for the love that had carried me through even the darkest moments. Grace's memory was no longer a source of sorrow but a wellspring of strength. Her light lived on in the work I did, the connections I nurtured, and the joy I allowed myself to feel. She had taught me the power of love, and that love would guide me as I continued to move forward. As I sat at my desk one evening, drafting plans for the Foundation's next event, I glanced at the photo of Grace that hung on the wall above me. Her smile was as radiant as ever, a constant reminder of the love that had shaped my life. "I think we're doing pretty well, don't you?" I said aloud, smiling softly. The room was quiet, but in that stillness I felt her presence, warm and comforting. It was as though she was saying, "Yes, Mom, you're doing great," and for the first time in a long time I truly believed it. The story of my life wasn't over. It was just beginning. The pages ahead were blank, waiting to be filled with moments of love, joy, and purpose. And as I picked up my pen to write the next chapter, I felt ready to embrace whatever the future held. Because I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. The idea to expand the Grace Foundation had been brewing in my mind for months, but it wasn't until that quiet evening by the bay window, Grace's photo smiling down at me, that I truly committed to it. What had started as a local initiative to support a handful of families had grown into something much larger than I'd ever imagined. And yet, I knew there was more to be done. More lives to touch, more families to help, more love to share in Grace's name. The next morning, I dove into the work with a renewed sense of purpose. My first step was to assemble a team, a group of people as passionate about the Foundation's mission as I was. Clara, my friend from the art event, became my first recruit. Her creative vision and personal experience with loss made her an invaluable addition. Together, we reached out to others in the community, building a network of dedicated volunteers, healthcare professionals, and advocates who shared our dream of expanding the Foundation's reach. With the team in place, I turned my attention to securing the funding we would need to grow. I drafted grant proposals, scheduled meetings with potential donors, and hosted fundraising events that combined creativity with purpose. One event, a gallery showcase featuring art and photography inspired by the stories of the families we'd helped, was a resounding success. People from all walks of life came to support the cause. Their generosity and compassion were a testament to the power of community. As the donations poured in, I felt a sense of validation that went beyond the financial. This wasn't just about raising money, It was about raising awareness, about showing people the importance of the work we were doing. Each dollar meant another family could receive the support they needed, another child could experience joy in the midst of hardship, another piece of Grace's legacy could come to life. The turning point came when the foundation achieved a high-profile success story. A single mother named Erica, whose son Jonah was battling a rare form of cancer, had come to us in desperation. She had exhausted every resource, every ounce of strength, trying to give Jonah the care he needed. The foundation stepped in, providing financial assistance for his treatments and emotional support for Erica through our mentorship program. Months later, Jonah's treatment led to a miraculous recovery. His story was picked up by a local news station, and soon it spread like wildfire. Reporters called, asking about the foundation's role in Jonah's journey. Invitations to speak at events and conferences flooded my inbox. Overnight, the Grace Foundation became a symbol of hope and resilience, its name synonymous with the kind of love and compassion Grace had embodied. The recognition brought new opportunities. Corporations offered sponsorships, prominent figures reached out to collaborate, and organizations across the country expressed interest in partnering with us. It was overwhelming, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time, I saw the possibility of taking the foundation national, a dream I hadn't dared to articulate until now. As the foundation grew, so did my sense of fulfillment. The work was demanding, often exhausting, but it gave my life a purpose I hadn't felt since Grace was alive. Each family we helped, each life we touched, felt like another way to keep her memory alive. She wasn't just a part of my past, she was a part of everything we were building. One evening, after a particularly long day, I sat in the office reviewing a stack of thank you letters from families we had supported. Each letter told a story of gratitude and resilience, of lives changed by the foundation's work. As I read them, I felt tears prick my eyes, not of sadness, but of profound joy. This was Grace's legacy. This was her light shining through the darkness. The national expansion of the foundation brought new challenges, but it also brought new rewards. We opened branches in cities across the country, each one staffed by passionate individuals who believed in our mission. We developed programs tailored to the unique needs of different communities, ensuring that no family would feel forgotten or unsupported. At one of our national conferences, I stood on stage in front of hundreds of supporters, sharing the story of how the foundation had come to be. As I spoke about Grace, her strength, her kindness, her unwavering spirit, I saw tears in the eyes of the audience. Her story had touched them just as it had touched me, and in that moment, I realized that Grace wasn't just my daughter, she was a symbol of hope for everyone in that room. In the quieter moments, I often found myself reflecting on how far I had come. The woman who had once felt broken and lost was now a leader, an advocate, a builder of something greater than herself. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed, becoming a source of strength rather than sorrow. Marcus's betrayal and Grace's loss were chapters in my story, but they weren't the whole story. The pages I was writing now were filled with love, purpose, and the unshakable belief that even the darkest moments could lead to something beautiful. One sunny afternoon, I visited a new playground the foundation had funded in Grace's name. The laughter of children filled the air as they ran across the bright, colorful structures. A plaque near the entrance read, "In loving memory of Grace, a light that shines forever." I sat on a nearby bench, watching the children play, and felt a deep sense of peace. This was what Grace would have wanted, a world where joy and love outweighed the pain, where her light could guide others even in her absence. A little girl with curly hair and a wide smile ran up to me, holding out a flower she had picked from the grass. "This is for you," she said, her voice sweet and earnest. I took the flower, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," I said, smiling down at her as she ran back to join her friends. I held the flower to my chest, feeling Grace's presence in the laughter and sunshine around me. She was with me, in every step I took, in every life the foundation touched, in every moment of joy I allowed myself to feel. The story of my life had taken twists and turns I never could have predicted. It had been filled with heartbreak and loss, but also with love and resilience. And through it all, Grace had been my guiding star, her memory a constant reminder of the strength we carry within us. As I walked away from the playground that day, I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't known before. Grace's legacy wasn't just a foundation or a playground or a name on a plaque. It was a living, breathing force, a testament to the power of love to overcome even the deepest pain. This was my new beginning, my purpose, my joy. And it was all because of grace.